A storm is coming to Washington. A titan of power, forged in the fires of political warfare, prepares to execute a rival on live television. But in the shadows, a quiet warrior has laid a trap of his own, built not with steel, but with secrets. This is the story of the hunter becoming the hunted. Smash that like button, subscribe, and stay until the end to see how this shocking showdown unfolds. The air in the House Judiciary Committee hearing room was thick with the scent of ambition and blood. It was a coliseum built of marble and mahogany, and Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House, was its reigning empress. She sat elevated, a queen on her throne, surveying the arena she had prepared for a public execution. Her gaze, a mixture of imperial disdain and theatrical boredom, settled on the man seated alone at the witness table below, Kash Patel. To her, he was not the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He was an insect, a temporary annoyance to be crushed under the heel of her legacy. The network cameras, like loyal legionnaires, were positioned to capture the kill shot. Her allies on the committee, a chorus of nodding heads and practiced scowls, flanked her, ready to amplify the humiliation. The trap was set. The narrative for the evening news had already been written. Today, the upstart who dared question the powerful would be taught a final, brutal lesson. Pelosi leaned into the microphone, the slight crackle of the speaker system the only sound in the hushed chamber. A smirk played on her lips, a familiar weapon she had wielded for decades to disarm opponents and delight her followers. She let the silence hang for a moment longer, savoring the prelude to the slaughter. "Mr. Patel," she began, her voice dripping with a carefully crafted condescension that could strip paint from a wall. She intentionally omitted his title, the first of 1,000 cuts she planned to inflict. "Let us be clear about what you are. You are a writer of children's fiction, a peddler of conspiracies who has somehow stumbled into one of the most serious jobs in the world. You penned a book called The Plot Against the King. A fitting title, perhaps, for a man who sees shadows in every corner and imagines himself a hero in a fairy tale of his own making." Laughter, sharp and rehearsed, rippled through the Democratic side of the room. The sound was a well-orchestrated symphony of contempt. Pelosi's eyes gleamed. This was her stage, her arena, and the crowd was roaring for blood. She continued, her voice rising, "You are not a serious person. You are a caricature, a footnote in history that we are here to correct today. Before you do any more damage to the great institution you now pretend to lead, we are going to expose you for what you are. A fraud." Kash Patel did not move. He did not flinch. He sat perfectly still, his posture unwavering, his expression a mask of calm that seemed to infuriate the speaker more than any outburst could. He had anticipated this. He had studied her tactics, her arrogance, her unshakable belief in her own invincibility. It was the foundation upon which he had built his entire strategy. He allowed her to exhaust her opening salvo, to fully commit to the character of the arrogant tyrant. He let the cameras drink in her smugness, let the record show her undisguised malice. Only when the last echo of derisive laughter faded did he make his move. Slowly, with the deliberate precision of a bomb disposal expert, he reached for a thick, crimson folder on the table before him. The words FBI Confidential were stamped across it in stark, black letters. He opened it, the rustle of paper cutting through the tense silence. He looked up, not at the speaker, but at the gallery, at the cameras, at the American people watching from their homes. "Madam Speaker," he said, his voice steady and clear, devoid of the anger she had tried to provoke. "You are correct. I write children's books. They teach simple, timeless lessons. Lessons about truth, lessons about courage, and lessons about how even the most powerful villains eventually face a reckoning." He paused, letting his words hang in the air, a direct challenge to the narrative she had so carefully constructed. He then looked directly at her, a glint of steel now visible in his eyes. "You see, in my stories, the villain's greatest weakness is always their arrogance. They believe their castle walls are impenetrable. They believe their power is absolute. They never imagine that the truth is a key that can unlock any door and expose any crime. He slid a single document from the folder. You mock my books as fairy tales, but today I've brought you a story of nonfiction. It's a story of corruption, betrayal, and the abuse of power. And unlike my books, Madam Speaker, this story does not have a happy ending for the villain. The smirk on Nancy Pelosi's face did not falter, but for the first time it seemed brittle. A flicker of uncertainty, so faint that only the most observant could see it, crossed her eyes. The laughter in the room had died, replaced by a sudden, sharp intake of breath. The temperature seemed to drop. The hunter had just realized that the prey she was stalking was not a rabbit, but a tiger that had been waiting patiently for her to step into its cage. The execution was about to begin, but the roles of executioner and victim had just been dramatically and publicly reversed. Pelosi's eyes, which had moments before been alight with predatory glee, now narrowed into slits of cold fury. The shift in the room's atmosphere was palpable, a physical change from a political rally to a high-stakes interrogation. The air, once filled with the smug certainty of her allies, now crackled with a tense, unnerving silence. The cameras, which had been poised to capture Patel's humiliation, now zoomed in on her, searching for the first crack in the marble facade. She attempted to regain control, to dismiss his theatricality with a wave of her hand. "Enough of your games, Mr. Patel. We are not here for your amateur dramatics. We are here to discuss your manifest unsuitability to lead the FBI. Your qualifications are a mockery. A failed staffer, a purveyor of baseless conspiracies, and now, it seems, a frustrated novelist." She gestured dismissively at the folder he had opened. "Whatever documents you have manufactured will not distract from the central issue, your incompetence." Kash Patel absorbed the volley without reaction, his calmness a stark contrast to the speaker's rising agitation. He looked down at the single sheet of paper he had extracted. "I agree, let's discuss qualifications," he said, his tone even and measured. "One of the primary qualifications for public service is a foundational understanding of ethics. It's a concept I explore in my books. It seems it's also a subject of some interest to your own family." He held up the document. "You see, Madam Speaker, the FBI hosts an annual Youth and Governance essay competition. We receive submissions from students across the country. It's a wonderful initiative. This year, we received a particularly insightful entry from a young man in California. A student at St. Ignatius College Preparatory in San Francisco." A flicker of recognition, quickly suppressed, crossed Pelosi's face. The name of the school was a well-aimed dart. Patel continued, his voice relentless. "The essay is titled Public Service or Self-Service, A Grandmother's Legacy. It was written by your grandson, Paul. Would you like me to read it aloud, or should I submit it into the official record?" The name, spoken with such deliberate clarity, struck the room like a gavel. Pelosi's carefully maintained composure fractured. The mask of the powerful stateswoman slipped, revealing a flash of raw, personal fury. "How dare you?" she hissed, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You bring my family into this, my grandson. That is a private matter. It is beneath contempt, even for you." The members of the committee stirred, murmuring amongst themselves. This was an unexpected, deeply personal line of attack. It felt transgressive, a violation of the unwritten rules of political combat. But Patel was not playing by the old rules. He was establishing a new one. There are no safe harbors for corruption. He submitted it to a federal agency contest. "Madam Speaker," Kash replied, his voice cutting through her outrage, "that makes it a public document, and its contents are profoundly relevant to this hearing on government integrity." He looked directly at her, his gaze unwavering. "Your grandson writes, and I quote, 'At our family dinners, the conversations are not about the people my grandmother serves, but about the opportunities she has. Deals are discussed like chess moves. A new regulation is not a matter of public good, but a chance for a profitable investment. My grandmother calls it the way Washington works, but my civics teacher calls it a conflict of interest. It feels wrong to me watching my family get richer while the city she represents gets poorer. A wave of shock rippled through the chamber. The words of the child, so simple and direct, carried more weight than any political accusation. They were an indictment from within the fortress, a voice of conscience from the heart of the dynasty. Pelosi was sputtering, her face a mask of crimson rage. That is a gross distortion. He's a child. You are twisting the words of a boy to score cheap political points. Am I? Patel's voice was cold steel. He placed the essay back into the folder and pulled out a new set of documents, thicker this time, bound with a heavy clip. You accuse me of twisting words and peddling conspiracies. Let's talk about that. For years, I stated that the FBI, under previous leadership, illegally spied on a presidential campaign. You stood on the floor of the House and called me a liar. You called me a Russian agent. You used the power of your office to brand me a traitor. He held up the new documents. These are the declassified Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act warrants, the ones you swore didn't exist. The ones that prove the investigation was predicated on a dossier funded by a rival campaign. The ones that prove the FBI knowingly misled the FISA court. The ones that prove everything I said was true. He didn't just hold them up. He placed the first page onto the document projector. The screen behind him lit up with a heavily redacted but damning text. Key phrases were highlighted in yellow, impossible to ignore. You knew the truth, Madam Speaker. You were briefed on the fraudulent origins of the investigation. And yet, you went on national television and lied to the American people. You didn't just call me a conspiracy theorist. You became the chief architect of the conspiracy itself. He turned to the committee. Every theory I have advanced has been vindicated by official documents, the Russia hoax, the FISA abuse. The weaponization of our intelligence agencies against a sitting president. The question is not why I brought these truths to light. The question this committee should be asking is why the Speaker of the House worked so tirelessly to keep them buried. The room was silent, the air thick with the gravity of the accusation. The narrative had been irrevocably shattered. This was no longer an oversight hearing about Kash Patel's qualifications. It was rapidly becoming a trial of Nancy Pelosi's conduct, and Patel was not the defendant but the prosecutor. A Republican congressman from a sprawling Texas district, a man known for his folksy but sharp interrogations, leaned into his microphone. His voice, a slow drawl, cut through the tension. Director Patel, are you formally accusing the Speaker of the House of participating in a cover-up of federal crimes? The question hung in the air, a direct invitation for Patel to cross a line from which there was no return. Kash turned to him, his expression serious. Congressman, I am not here to make suggestions, I am here to present facts. Facts supported by evidence. He slid another document from his folder, this one bearing the letterhead of the Department of Justice. In 2019, I was the lead investigator on the House Intelligence Committee, tasked with uncovering corruption within our own government. My investigation was gaining traction. We were getting close to something big, a web of financial and political misconduct. Then, suddenly, it was shut down, halted. My security clearance was threatened, and I was reassigned. He placed the new document on the projector. It was a series of call logs. Here are the phone records from the Department of Justice for the week my investigation was terminated. And here, he pointed to a highlighted entry, is the call that ended it all. A direct call from the personal office of Speaker Nancy Pelosi to the office of the Attorney General. The call lasted 17 minutes. 12 hours later, my investigation was officially dead. The implication was explosive and undeniable. It wasn't just that she had lied. It was that she had actively used the power of her office to obstruct a legitimate investigation into corruption. She had acted as the protector of the very swamp she claimed to oppose. But that, Patel continued, his voice dropping, a new, more personal intensity entering his tone, is not the real reason she despises me. That was just business. Her hatred for me is far more visceral." He paused, allowing his own story to become part of the testimony. "My parents were not born into power. They were not part of a political dynasty. They were refugees. They fled the brutal, corrupt regime of Idi Amin in Uganda. They arrived in America with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a belief in a simple, powerful idea that in this country, unlike the one they left, the law applied equally to everyone. That hard work and honesty were the true currency of success, not connections, not bribery, not your family name." His words resonated with a moral authority that Pelosi's attacks lacked. He was framing the conflict not as a partisan squabble, but as a fundamental battle between two opposing visions of America. "The Speaker," he said, his gaze locking onto hers, "represents everything my parents risked their lives to escape. A system where a ruling class enriches itself, where rules are for the little people, and where dissent is crushed by the powerful. A system of cronyism and contempt for the ordinary citizen." Pelosi's face, already flushed with anger, turned a shade darker. "How dare you?" she seethed, her voice trembling with rage. "How dare you stand there and question my patriotism? My family has a long and proud history of service to this nation." "Your family has a long and proud history of serving itself," Patel shot back, his voice like a whip crack. The time for calm deference was over. The foundation of evidence had been laid, and now it was time to build the case. "And today, right here in this room, I am going to prove it beyond any shadow of a doubt." As if on cue, a senior Democratic congressman, a longtime Pelosi loyalist from Illinois, attempted to run interference. "Mr. Chairman, this is an outrage. This is a slanderous abuse of the FBI's power. The director is engaging in a politically motivated witch hunt, making baseless accusations against the Speaker of the House. The intervention was designed to break Patel's momentum, to give the Speaker a moment to recover and regroup. But Patel was ready for it. He turned his head slowly, his eyes fixing on the congressman. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Congressman Morrison," he said, his tone quiet and deadly, "I appreciate your concern for the integrity of this hearing. Perhaps while we are on the topic of integrity, you would be interested in discussing the contents of your text messages with the Speaker. Specifically, the ones from last March, the ones where you thank her for the timely advice regarding the upcoming hearings on the technology sector just before you sold your portfolio of tech stocks. Would you like me to project those messages onto the screen for the committee to review?" Congressman Morrison froze, the blood drained from his face, leaving him a ghastly shade of pale. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked as if he had been struck by lightning. He sank back into his chair, his eyes wide with panic, and fell utterly silent. The palpable shock of his retreat sent a wave of fear through the Democratic side of the aisle. The hunters, who had entered the room so confident in their numbers and their power, were suddenly realizing they were trapped in a minefield. Any one of them could be next. The atmosphere had shifted from a political hearing to a hostage situation, and Kash Patel was the only one who knew where all the bombs were buried. He had just demonstrated that his folders contained secrets on everyone. The pack of hyenas, once so eager for the kill, was now scattering, each one suddenly terrified that their own sins would be the next to be exposed. The collective had been shattered, replaced by individual survival instinct. Pelosi was no longer the leader of a unified front. She was alone, surrounded by allies who were now paralyzed by fear. Kash Patel let the silence hang, allowing the fear he had just sown to take root. The image of Congressman Morrison, struck dumb with terror, was a more powerful statement than any document. It was a live demonstration of his power. He was not just an accuser. He was the keeper of everyone's darkest secrets. He turned his attention back to the full committee, his voice now taking on the quality of a lecturer revealing a grand, terrible truth. "You see," he began, "when I was confirmed as FBI director, I didn't just inherit an office. I inherited a graveyard. A vast digital cemetery filled with the ghosts of investigations that had been mysteriously terminated, shut down without explanation, often just as they were getting close to the truth. He gestured to the stack of folders on his table. Investigations into congressional insider trading. Investigations into foreign lobbying and illegal influence campaigns. Investigations into bribery, kickbacks, and the siphoning of public funds. For years, a select few in this town have been protected, their crimes buried under layers of political influence and bureaucratic inertia. He looked directly at Nancy Pelosi, his voice dropping to an almost conversational tone, yet carrying the weight of a death sentence. Today, we are reopening every single one of those cases. The graveyard is being excavated, and the ghosts are beginning to talk. The threat was no longer personal, it was systemic. He was declaring war not just on her, but on the entire corrupt ecosystem that had allowed her to thrive. He then brought the focus back to her, making it intensely personal once more. You tried to destroy my career in 2019. It wasn't enough to simply shut down my investigation. You came after me. You had me put under surveillance. You launched an internal ethics probe based on fabricated leaks to the media. You filed a complaint to have me disbarred, to strip me of my ability to earn a living. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. But you didn't stop there, did you? Madam Speaker, you made it truly personal. You decided to come after my family. He pulled a new document from the folder. It was an email, its header stark and official. You even had your chief of staff contact Immigration and Customs Enforcement. You suggested they should look into the immigration status of my parents. The room, which had been murmuring with political intrigue, fell into a stunned, tomb-like silence. This was a line that, once crossed, could never be uncrossed. It was a move of such naked, vicious cruelty that it transcended politics. A lie, Pelosi shouted, her voice cracking. The accusation had clearly struck a nerve, raw and exposed. That is a despicable lie, is it? Patel's voice was ice. He placed the email on the projector. The text filled the screen, cold and damning. It was a message from Pelosi's chief of staff to a senior official at ICE. The subject line read, Query Re. Patel family. The body of the email was brief and chilling. The Speaker's office would be grateful for any information regarding the naturalization process and current status of the parents of Kash Patel. We have reason to believe there may be irregularities. Patel let the image burn into the retinas of everyone present. Irregularities, my parents are American citizens, Madam Speaker. They've been for decades. They are more patriotic, more dedicated to the ideals of this nation than you could ever comprehend. But you saw their immigrant background not as a story of American success, but as a vulnerability. A weapon you could use to silence an investigator who was getting too close to your criminal enterprise. The impact on the room was profound. In the gallery, a group of veterans who had been sitting quietly began to stir, their faces hardening with anger. A few rows away, a contingent of immigrant rights activists who had come to the hearing to support Pelosi now stared at her with expressions of shock and betrayal. She had weaponized the very thing they fought to protect. That is the fundamental difference between us, Madam Speaker, Patel said, his voice resonating with a quiet, righteous fury. My parents came to this country with nothing and built a life through honest, hard work. Your family has been in politics for generations, and with each passing generation, you have grown richer and more powerful, not by building, but by taking. You are the embodiment of the corruption they fled, wrapped in an American flag. He closed the first folder with a sharp, final thud. The sound echoed in the silent room like a cell door slamming shut. He then reached for a second folder, this one thicker, bulging with papers. Now, he said, his voice devoid of all emotion, let's discuss your stock portfolio. Because while my children's books were teaching kids about the simple difference between right and wrong, your trading records were writing a masterclass in crime and punishment. Pelosi gripped the edge of her desk, her knuckles white. The confident, imperious queen who had entered the hearing was gone, replaced by a cornered animal. Her empire, built over a lifetime of ruthless ambition, was beginning to tremble, its foundations cracking one document at a time. The air was thick, people with the promise of more revelations, each one more damaging than the last. The public execution was well underway, but the blood in the sand belonged to its architect. The second folder opened with a soft rustle of paper that sounded like a death rattle in the silent chamber. Kash Patel's demeanor shifted. The righteous anger was replaced by the cold, dispassionate precision of a forensic accountant. He was no longer just a prosecutor, he was a mathematician about to present an irrefutable equation of greed. Let's begin with why you truly wanted me gone in 2019, Madam Speaker, he stated, pulling out a thick sheaf of financial records. It wasn't just about a general corruption probe. I was investigating the largest, most sophisticated insider trading ring in the history of American politics. And you, Madam Speaker, were sitting at the head of the table. He projected a chart onto the screen. It was a simple bar graph, but its implications were devastating. Your husband, Paul Pelosi, has a truly remarkable talent for investing. Over the past 5 years, his options trades have achieved a 94% success rate, a 94% win rate. Patel let the number hang in the air. To provide some context for the committee and the American people, Renaissance Technologies, the most successful quantitative hedge fund in the world, a firm that employs Nobel Prize-winning mathematicians and physicists, averages a 66% success rate. Warren Buffett, the legendary Oracle of Omaha, one of the greatest investors in history, has an average annual return of around 20%. But Paul Pelosi, a private investor operating from his home office, somehow outperforms them all by an astronomical margin. He is, by the numbers, the single greatest financial trader in human history. Or, Patel paused, letting the alternative sink in, he has a different kind of edge. The screen behind him changed, displaying a timeline that was as damning as a signed confession. Let's examine one of these remarkably skillful trades. December 17, 2021. At 3:47 p.m., your husband purchases approximately $10 million in call options for NVIDIA, a major semiconductor company. A massive, speculative bet that the stock is about to go up, the timeline advanced. Now, let's look at your official schedule for that day. It's empty. But your private schedule, obtained under warrant, tells a different story. On that same day, you held a private, undisclosed meeting with the CEOs of several top semiconductor firms. That meeting concluded at 3:24 p.m. Patel looked up from his notes. That is a 23-minute gap, Madam Speaker. 23 minutes between you receiving material, non-public information about the future of the semiconductor industry and your husband making a $10 million bet on that exact industry. That's circumstantial. Pelosi protested, her voice strained. Her hands were visibly shaking now, a tremor she could not conceal. Anyone could have seen the CHIPS Act was coming. Could they? Patel's response was swift and brutal. He projected a new piece of evidence, phone records. Because here is the call log from your personal cell phone. At 3:31 p.m., a call was placed from your phone to your husband's. The duration was 7 minutes, just enough time to pass along a simple instruction, wouldn't you say? Something like, "Buy NVIDIA, now." The evidence was relentless, a series of sledgehammer blows to her credibility. The screen changed again. March 11, 2020, your husband executes a massive short position on airline and hotel stocks, betting that their value is about to plummet. March 12, 2020, you attend a highly classified intelligence briefing on a novel coronavirus where you are informed of the high probability of imminent national lockdowns and travel restrictions. March 13th, the market crashes. Your family profits to the tune of $4.7 million. Patel's voice grew heavy with contempt, while American families were about to lose their jobs. Their businesses and their life savings, you were using classified information about their impending misery to make a fortune. That's not just unethical, Madam Speaker. That is predatory. This is all conjecture. You have no definitive proof. She insisted, her defense growing weaker with each denial. No proof. Patel's voice was laced with disbelief. He held up a new document, a printout of a digital message. You thought your communications on WhatsApp were secure. You were mistaken. We recovered the cloud backups. The screen showed a screenshot of a message. The sender was NP. The recipient was Paul. The date was June 3, 2021. The message was chillingly simple. Microsoft Cloud contract coming. By calls tomorrow. Delete this. Gasps rippled through the hearing room. This was not a call log or a trading record. This was a direct, explicit instruction to commit a felony, followed by an attempt to conceal it. It was the smoking gun, still warm to the touch. He didn't delete it from the server backup, Madam Speaker, Patel explained calmly. On June 4th, your husband purchased millions in Microsoft call options. On June 7th, the Pentagon announced a surprise $10 billion cloud computing contract with Microsoft, your profit, $1.8 million. He turned to address the entire committee, his voice resonating with authority. This is not a pattern of lucky guesses. This is a criminal enterprise operating from the highest office in the legislative branch. The Speaker of the House has transformed her public service into a private hedge fund, and every piece of legislation, every classified briefing, every backroom deal has become another opportunity for personal enrichment. The room was utterly silent, the weight of the evidence pressing down on everyone. The political game was over. This was now a matter of pure, unadulterated crime. The Queen had been revealed as a common thief. A young, progressive congresswoman from New York, known for her fiery rhetoric against corporate greed and Wall Street corruption, leaned forward. She had been a vocal supporter of Pelosi, but her face was now a mask of troubled disbelief. Director Patel, she began, her voice hesitant, these are incredibly serious allegations. The evidence is compelling, but do you have anything beyond these digital records, anything physical? Her question was a lifeline, a search for some flaw in the mountain of evidence, some way to reconcile the woman she thought she knew with the criminal Patel was describing. Kash Patel turned to her, his expression almost sympathetic. I'm glad you asked, Congresswoman. Because the digital trail is only the beginning, he reached into his folder and produced a series of photographs. We found the burner phones. The statement landed with the force of a physical blow. In the modern world of political scandal, burner phones were the tools of drug dealers and spies, a clear indicator of a conscious effort to evade surveillance, plural, Patel added for emphasis. The Pelosi family and their network of congressional associates were using a coordinated system of 17 prepaid, untraceable phones to discuss and execute their trades. We have the purchase records for all of them. All bought with cash from different convenience stores across the D.C. area. He projected a grainy, black and white image onto the screen. It was security camera footage. The man at the counter, wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses, was unmistakably Paul Pelosi. He was holding a handful of cash and pointing to a rack of prepaid phones. Unfortunately for him, Patel noted dryly, the store's security camera was of a higher quality than he anticipated. The congresswoman sank back in her chair, her face pale. The physical evidence had erased any lingering doubt, but Patel was not finished. The phones themselves, however, are not the real smoking gun, he continued, his voice building with intensity. The real smoking gun is what we found on them. We broke the encryption. We found the group chat. He projected a new image, a screenshot from a messaging app. The group's name was displayed at the top, SF Trading Club. Below it was a list of 19 members, a who's who of influential members of Congress, lobbyists and D.C. insiders, and at the very top, listed as the group's administrator, was a single contact, Nancy P. Main. The screen then filled with screenshots of the chat itself. It was a cesspool of insider information. A congressman on the Armed Services Committee sharing details about a pending defense contract. A senator on the banking committee giving a heads-up about a new regulatory action, and Pelosi herself orchestrating the flow of information, directing her club on how to position themselves to profit from the legislative agenda she controlled. This could be fabricated, Pelosi shouted, her voice a desperate, ragged cry. These images could be faked, then why? Patel asked, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level as he held up his own personal smartphone. Did you just send a text message to your lawyer? Oh, yes, Madam Speaker, we have a live warrant. Your communications are being monitored in real time, he read from his screen. The text you sent exactly 12 seconds ago reads, and I quote, they have the WhatsApp group. All of it. Prepare the defense for the trades. Stall. The room erupted. A wave of chaos swept through the chamber as reporters scrambled, congressmen shouted, and Pelosi, her face a mask of pure horror, frantically fumbled in her purse for her own phone, realizing far too late that the device she held was not a tool but a beacon broadcasting her guilt to the very man she had sought to destroy. Patel let the chaos swell for a moment before cutting through it, his voice calm and conversational, which only made his words more chilling. You know, my personal favorite of all your trades is the one from September 2022. Your husband sells his entire portfolio of big tech stocks. 3 days later, you hold a surprise press conference to announce a new, sweeping congressional investigation into big tech monopolies. The market panics, tech stocks plummet. Your husband avoids an estimated $30 million in losses. He paused. But here's the truly elegant part of the crime. We have the email you sent him. The subject line reads, dinner plans, very clever. But you forgot about the attachment. He projected the email onto the screen. Attached to the innocuous message was a file, press_release_draft_v7.docx. It's the draft of your press release, Madam Speaker. Sent to your husband 72 hours before it went public. A direct, personal, and irrefutable piece of evidence of insider trading on a massive scale. An older Republican from Ohio, a man who had served on the Ethics Committee for 2 decades, slammed his hand on the table. This is securities fraud on a scale I have never witnessed. The Securities and Exchange Commission must launch a full investigation immediately. The SEC has been trying to investigate for years, Patel revealed, the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. Every time their investigators got close, every time they issued a subpoena, they were met with a wall of resistance. The investigation would be mysteriously shut down from above. It was a great mystery. Until we discovered that the deputy director of the Sex Enforcement Division, the man with the power to kill any investigation, is your nephew, Timothy Pelosi. He has personally quashed 7 separate inquiries into your family's trading activities. At that moment, Pelosi's lawyer, a high-priced attorney from a prestigious D.C. firm, abruptly stood up. Mr. Chairman, he stammered, looking pale and shaken, I request a brief recess for my client to compose herself. The Republican chairman, a stern Floridian who had been watching the proceedings with grim satisfaction, pointed a finger at him. Sit down, counselor, he ordered, his voice booming through the chamber. We're just getting to the good part. Kash Patel ignored the lawyer's aborted attempt to intervene, his focus as sharp as a scalpel. He reached into the folder and pulled out one last document related to the insider trading charges. There is one final exhibit for this section, he announced, his voice resonating with a quiet solemnity. This one is my favorite. Because this one, Madam Speaker, is not about your husband or your nephew or your trading club. This one is about you. He placed a financial statement on the projector. This is your personal brokerage account. Not your husband's, yours, an account you have personally managed for over 20 years. The screen showed a specific transaction highlighted in a blood-red box. December 2019, you personally authorized the purchase of a significant block of stock in a small, relatively unknown biopharmaceutical company called Gilead Sciences. You let the name hang in the air, a name that would soon be known in every household on the planet. Then, in January 2020, you, as a member of the Gang of Eight, received one of the first top-secret intelligence briefings on a new, highly contagious virus emerging from Wuhan, China. A briefing that detailed the potential for a global pandemic. He looked up from the document, his eyes locking onto Pelosi's. The air in the room grew heavy, thick with the stench of a crime far more profound than mere financial fraud. Out of the thousands of pharmaceutical and biotech companies in the world, Madam Speaker, you just happened to pick the very one that would go on to develop one of the first approved treatments for COVID-19. Their stock, as we all know, skyrocketed. A 400% increase in a matter of months. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low, intense whisper. How did you know, Madam Speaker, how did you know to buy that exact company at that exact time? That isn't skill. That isn't luck. That is criminal insider trading based on classified information about a coming global catastrophe. The room was dead silent. The accusation was monstrous. It painted a picture not just of a corrupt politician, but of a ghoul who saw a looming pandemic not as a threat to human life, but as a hot stock tip. Patel's voice softened, but it carried a new weight of sorrow and disgust. In my children's books, he said quietly, the villain is often a dragon, hoarding gold in its lair, completely indifferent to the suffering of the people in the village below. The dragon believes it is untouchable, that its mountain of treasure makes it invincible. It always believes it is too smart, too powerful to ever be caught. He looked at Pelosi, who seemed to have shrunk in her chair, the aura of power that had once surrounded her now completely gone, replaced by an aura of pure criminality. You always believe you're above the law. But in the end, the truth always wins, justice always wins. Just like it's winning today. He closed the insider trading folder with a soft, final click. The sound was like a nail being hammered into a coffin. He then reached for a new folder, this one a deep blue. Now, he declared, his voice hardening again, a new fire of personal anger in his eyes, let's talk about what you've done to my home. Let's talk about what you've done to the state of California. Because while you were getting rich in Washington, the California dream was being turned into a nightmare. And that, Madam Speaker, is personal. He opened the new folder, and the story of corruption moved from the sterile world of stock tickers to the desperate streets of his home state. My parents chose California when they fled Uganda, he began, his voice now carrying the raw edge of a son defending his family's honor. They saw it as the promised land, a golden state where the sun shone and opportunity was limitless. A place where their children could grow up free from the rot of a corrupt government. You, he said, pointing a finger directly at her, have turned that promised land into the very thing they fled. The first document he projected was a complex web of financial flows, a dizzying chart of arrows connecting government agencies to a network of nonprofit organizations. Let's start with your homeless industrial complex, he said, the term itself an indictment. In the last 5 years, the state of California and the city of San Francisco have spent over $10 billion on the homeless crisis. And yet, the problem has only gotten worse. The streets are more dangerous, the encampments are larger, the human suffering is more profound. So, where did all that money go? He tapped the screen. It went here. To this web of charities and nonprofits, and what do they all have in common? Every single one of them has a Pelosi family member, a former staffer, or a major political donor on its board of directors. He pointed to one of the largest nodes on the chart. This one, Bay Area Solutions, received $47 million in city grants last year. It has 12 employees and a single, rented office. An audit found no records of a single homeless person ever receiving services. The director of this organization is your nephew. He pointed to another. This one, Golden Gate Outreach, received $83 million. Most of it was spent on consulting fees paid to firms owned by your biggest campaign contributors. Your former chief of staff sits on the board. Those are respected organizations doing vital work. Pelosi protested, her voice weak and unconvincing. Are they? Patel's response was swift. He signaled to an aide, and the screen behind him flickered to life, not with a document, but with a video. The face of a middle-aged Latina woman, her eyes filled with a weary sadness, filled the screen. Her name appeared at the bottom, Teresa Martinez. She might look familiar to you. Madam Speaker, Patel said grimly. The woman in the video began to speak, her voice trembling but clear. My name is Teresa Martinez. For 15 years, I was Nancy Pelosi's housekeeper. The hearing was no longer about politics, it was a reckoning. The voice of Teresa Martinez filled the chamber, a stark and poignant testament to the hypocrisy that lay at the heart of Pelosi's political empire. I cleaned her beautiful mansion in Pacific Heights, the woman on the screen said, her words unadorned and powerful. I served drinks at her fundraisers while she spoke to millionaires about fighting for the poor. For all those years, she paid me $7 an hour, in cash, under the table. No Social Security, no benefits, no overtime. The camera zoomed in on Teresa's face, capturing the deep lines of hardship etched around her eyes. When my son got sick and I asked for a small raise to help pay for his medicine, she fired me just like that. When I tried to file for unemployment, her lawyer sent me a letter threatening to have me investigated by immigration, even though I have been a proud American citizen for 30 years. I lost everything, for a time my family, and I lived in our car. The woman who stands on television and talks about fair wages and workers' rights, she is the reason my children had to sleep in a Honda. The video ended, but the image of Teresa Martinez's face lingered on the screen, a silent, damning accusation. The room was utterly still. Several of the Democratic congresswomen who had built their careers on platforms of social justice looked physically ill. They stared at Pelosi not with anger, but with a horrified sense of betrayal. But that, Kash Patel continued into the silence, his voice low and grim, is just the petty cruelty. Let's talk about the systematic destruction. Let's talk about your real estate empire. He replaced the video with a series of maps and property records. Here is the pattern, repeated over and over again across San Francisco. First, your political allies and city government declare a specific neighborhood blighted or in need of urban renewal. Property values plummet overnight as the city threatens eminent domain. Then, a series of anonymous shell companies, LLCs with opaque ownership structures, sweep in and buy up entire blocks for pennies on the dollar. He projected a list of company names. We found all 23 of them, and we traced the ownership of every single one back to you, your husband, and your inner circle. Once your companies own the land, a miracle happens. The blighted neighborhood is suddenly chosen for a massive, taxpayer-funded redevelopment project. Your properties, bought for next to nothing, suddenly become worth a fortune. You make millions while the families who lived there for generations are displaced, their communities destroyed. That is a baseless conspiracy theory. Pelosi stammered, but her voice lacked any conviction. Is it? Patel countered, immediately projecting a specific case study, June 2019. This block in the Mission District, home to dozens of working-class Hispanic families, is declared a public health hazard due to outdated plumbing. Property values crash by 60%. July 2019, a company called Norcal Investments LLC, one of your shell corporations, buys 7 apartment buildings in a single week. August 2020. The city announces a new revitalization initiative funded by a federal grant you personally secured to redevelop that exact block. Your properties instantly triple in value. Your net profit on a single deal, $8.7 million. He then showed a series of photographs, families packing their belongings into moving trucks, children crying on the sidewalk, eviction notices nailed to doors. This is the Martinez family, he said, pointing to a photo of an elderly couple. No relation to Teresa, they had lived in that building for 40 years. 3 generations under one roof, they are homeless now. But you made a tidy profit, so I suppose in your ledger it all balances out. The evidence kept coming, a relentless torrent of greed. Let's look at your property taxes, Patel said, displaying a new document. Your palatial mansion in Pacific Heights, the market value is estimated at over $25 million. But the assessed value, the number used to calculate your property tax bill, is just $2.3 million. You pay property taxes on less than 10% of your home's actual worth, while ordinary Californians are being taxed out of their homes. That's Proposition 13. She protested weakly, citing a famous California tax law. No, that's corruption, Patel corrected her instantly. Because the city assessor who granted you that ridiculously low valuation. The following year, he received a $50,000 consulting fee from your husband's investment firm. We have the invoice. We have the canceled check. He moved on to the drought, another crisis that had been turned into a profit center. From 2020 to 2022, California suffered a historic drought. Water restrictions were imposed on millions of residents. People were fined for watering their small lawns. But guess whose sprawling vineyards in Napa Valley were mysteriously granted an exemption from all water restrictions? He showed the water usage records. While ordinary citizens saw their gardens turn to dust, Pelosi's vineyards consumed millions of gallons of precious water, their grapes growing plump for expensive wines. But here, Patel said, his voice dropping, is where the scheme becomes truly evil. The water restrictions, which you publicly supported, drove hundreds of small, family-owned farms into bankruptcy. They couldn't afford to water their crops, their land became worthless. He projected a final set of documents, land purchase records. And who was there to buy up their failed farms for a fraction of their true value? A consortium of buyers, all linked back to your associates and your family's trust. You used a natural disaster you helped exacerbate to consolidate your control over California's agricultural heartland. You profited from a drought while California burned. He looked at her, his face a mask of cold disgust. You turned human misery into a business model. You destroyed the California dream and sold off the pieces for parts. Kash Patel closed the California folder with a sharp, definitive snap. The story of local graft and ruin was complete. He now reached for a folder that was stark black, marked only with a date, January 6, 2021. The mood in the room shifted again, from the grim reality of financial crimes to the raw, polarizing trauma of that day. Before we proceed, Patel said, his voice taking on a new level of gravity, I need to establish my position on that day. On January 6th, I was not a spectator watching events unfold on television. I was the Chief of Staff to the Acting Secretary of Defense. I was in the Pentagon. I was in the rooms where decisions were being made and, more critically, where decisions were being deliberately avoided. He opened the black folder. Madam Speaker, let's talk about what you knew and when you knew it. On January 4, 2021, 48 hours before the event, you and your staff received a detailed, multi-page intelligence briefing from the FBI. That briefing, which I have here, was not vague. It was specific. It warned that multiple organized groups were planning to breach the Capitol building itself. It mentioned specific threats of violence. You were told unequivocally that a significant security threat was imminent. The question is, what did you do with that information? Pelosi shifted in her seat, her expression guarded. We took all appropriate security measures based on the intelligence provided, did you? Patel's question was a razor blade. He produced a series of emails and official requests. Here is the formal request from the Chief of the Capitol Police, Stephen Sund, dated January 3rd, asking for National Guard support to bolster his forces. It was denied by your office, specifically by the House Sergeant at Arms, who reports directly to you. Here is his second, more urgent request on January 4th, after you received the FBI briefing, denied again. Here is his third request on the morning of January 5th, denied, and here is his final, desperate plea at 6 a.m. on January 6th, denied. He projected the email chain onto the screen. The repeated denials highlighted in stark red for separate requests for help. For times, your office refused to authorize the deployment of the National Guard, but it's worse than that. He displayed a new document, a sworn affidavit from the Deputy Chief of Capitol Police. This is testimony from Deputy Chief Yogananda Pittman. She states that you, Madam Speaker, personally instructed her that the security posture for the day should be minimal. Your exact words, according to her sworn testimony, were, "We don't want the optics of a military state for Joe's big day." The room was silent. The phrase optics for Joe's big day hung in the air, a chilling testament to political calculation overriding public safety. A Republican from Wyoming, a woman known for her hawkish stance on national security, leaned forward. Director Patel, are you suggesting that the Speaker of the House deliberately left the United States Capitol vulnerable to attack? I am stating that the evidence shows a clear, repeated, and inexplicable refusal to authorize standard security measures in the face of specific intelligence, Patel replied carefully. But here is the smoking gun. This is testimony from a whistleblower, a junior staffer who was present in your morning leadership meeting on January 6th. According to their sworn statement, as you discussed the impending protests, you said to your senior staff, and I quote, "If things get a little crazy, it's not the worst thing in the world for us. Let them make fools of themselves." Gasps and angry shouts erupted from the gallery. The cynicism of the statement was breathtaking. "Let them make fools of themselves," Patel repeated, his voice laced with ice. "Except people died, Madam Speaker. Police officers were assaulted, beaten, and suffered injuries they will carry for the rest of their lives. And you could have prevented it." He then produced a minute-by-minute timeline of the day's events. 12:53 p.m., the first barriers are breached. Your office is immediately notified. 1:05 p.m., Capitol Police issue an emergency call for all available officers to respond to the West Front. Your office instructs the sergeant at arms to wait and assess. 1:26 p.m., protesters are inside the building. Only then, 33 minutes after the initial breach, 33 minutes of brutal fighting for the officers on the ground, does your office finally give a partial approval for external assistance. He then pulled out another document, his face hardening. But here is the part that I find most disturbing. At 2:15 p.m., while the Capitol was under siege, while your own members were being evacuated, while officers were radioing for help, you were on a secure conference call. According to 3 separate individuals on that call, all of whom have provided sworn testimony, you said, "This is terrible, but we can work with this." He then played a short audio clip, its quality distorted but the words clear enough. It was a capture from a security radio channel. An officer is heard saying, "We need backup now." A second voice, a member of the Speaker's security detail, responds, "Stand by, command is assessing." Then, a moment later, the same security officer's voice, speaking to a colleague, "Package is secure." She is watching it on TV, seems ... Pleased, sir, that was your security detail. Madam Speaker, Patel said coldly. Describing your reaction while your employees were fighting for their lives in the hallways of your building. "I was terrified," Pelosi exclaimed, her voice shrill. "I was a target, were you?" Patel asked. He projected her official schedule for that day. "Your calendar shows you had a hair appointment scheduled 4 p.m. across town. The Capitol was breached at 1:26 p.m. You kept the appointment." He then showed a still image from a salon's security camera. It showed Nancy Pelosi sitting in a chair, a stylist working on her hair, while a television in the background showed live images of the chaos at the Capitol. "So terrified," Patel said with dripping sarcasm, "that you needed a blowout." The veterans in the gallery were on their feet, shouting in fury. The image of her being pampered while officers were being bludgeoned was an unforgivable insult. "The cover-up," Patel continued, his voice rising above the noise, was almost worse than the crime itself. In the weeks that followed, you personally oversaw a committee that authorized the deletion of over 14,000 hours of security camera footage from that day. Why would you destroy the primary evidence if you had nothing to hide? That footage was preserved for security reasons. She yelled. It was destroyed, Patel corrected. But you made a critical error. You didn't realize that the National Security Agency automatically creates secure, off-site backups of all surveillance feeds from critical government buildings. We have it all, Madam Speaker, all 14,000 hours. And it shows a very different story from the one you told the world. It shows some officers fighting heroically while others appear to be passively letting people into the building. It shows a coordinated, systemic failure of command and control. It shows that you did not just fail to prevent a riot. You created the conditions for one, and then you used it for your own political gain. Every person arrested, every family destroyed, every officer injured, that blood is on your hands. Kash Patel closed the black folder on the January 6th debacle. The air in the room was thick with a mixture of rage and grief. He had systematically dismantled her image as a defender of democracy, revealing her as a cynical opportunist who saw national trauma as a political tool. He now reached for the final folder, one that was even thicker than the rest. It was a deep, ominous red, the color of the flag of the nation it concerned. Now, he said, his voice dropping to a low, serious tone that commanded absolute attention, let's talk about China. Let's talk about what you've done to the national security of the United States. And yes, Madam Speaker, I am choosing my words very carefully. Let's talk about treason. The word, spoken with such deliberate gravity, silenced the entire room. It was the most serious accusation that could be leveled against any American citizen, let alone the Speaker of the House. Before we get to your more recent activities, Patel began, I want to show the committee something from the FBI's deep archives. He projected a grainy, black and white photograph. It showed a much younger Nancy Pelosi than Nancy D'Alessandro standing in Tiananmen Square. The date stamp on the photo read 1979. A simple cultural exchange trip you've always claimed, Patel said. But tourists on cultural exchanges don't typically get private meetings with senior officials from the Ministry of State Security, China's primary intelligence agency. You've been on their radar for over 40 years, Madam Speaker. You were identified as a promising, ambitious political figure ripe for cultivation. He then projected a declassified CIA assessment from 1980. It mentioned her by her maiden name. Noting that Chinese intelligence had designated her a long-term asset, they've been playing the long game with you since before you even held federal office, Patel stated. But let's fast forward to your time as Speaker. Your congressional district in San Francisco has the highest concentration of known Chinese intelligence operatives in America. Over the past decade, the FBI has briefed you on 67 active MSS agents operating in your district. Yet, you have used your influence to block the arrest or prosecution of every single one. The evidence mounted an avalanche of betrayal. Rose Pack, Patel said, naming a famous San Francisco political broker, your friend, your mentor, your fundraiser. The FBI informed you in 2011 that she was a deep cover agent for the Chinese government. We gave you irrefutable proof in 2014. We begged you to let us move on her in 2017. Each time, you personally intervened, providing her with political cover. She died a celebrated community leader, but she was a foreign agent who operated freely under your protection. She was a pillar of the community. Pelosi protested, her voice a weak rasp. She was a spy, Patel countered, projecting an audio transcript of an intercepted call. Here she is on the phone with her handler in Beijing, discussing our asset, Nancy, and how you had successfully shut down another FBI probe. You weren't just compromised, Madam Speaker. You were a fully managed asset. The financial records followed a tidal wave of laundered money. Since the year 2000, your family and its various business entities have received over $200 million from sources directly traceable to Chinese state-owned enterprises. Laundered through shell companies, hidden in real estate deals, disguised as consulting fees. We traced every dollar from Beijing to your bank accounts. He then moved to the theft of state secrets. Every major leak of sensitive American military technology to China in the last 20 years has a common denominator. It passed through a committee you sat on or controlled. The plans for the F-35 fighter jet, advanced submarine propulsion technology, quantum computing research. You were the gatekeeper, and the gate was wide open. His voice hardened with personal fury. And when I began investigating this in 2019, you didn't just use the DOJ to stop me. You sixed your Chinese contacts on my family. MSS operatives approached my sister at her cafe. They showed up at my elderly parents' temple. The message was unmistakable. Back off, or your immigrant family will pay the price. You used the power of a hostile foreign government to threaten American citizens on American soil to cover up your treason. He looked at her, his face a mask of utter contempt. You blocked sanctions against China for their genocide of the Uyghurs the same week your husband's fund received a massive capital injection from a shell company owned by the Chinese government. You sold out an entire people for profit. That's not politics. That's pure evil. He stood up, gathering all his folders into a single, towering stack. The evidence is overwhelming: insider trading, racketeering, obstruction of justice, and treason. For 6 months, a federal grand jury has been reviewing this evidence. They have handed down sealed indictments on 52 counts of insider trading, 17 counts of money laundering, 23 RICO violations, and 11 counts of conspiracy to defraud the United States. The only reason you were not arrested this morning was out of professional courtesy, to allow you to answer to Congress first. Just then, Pelosi's lawyer, who had been sitting in stunned silence, abruptly stood up. "Mr. Chairman," he announced, his voice shaking, "I must state for the record that I can no longer represent Speaker Pelosi. The evidence presented here suggests ongoing criminal activity that I cannot, as an officer of the court, be party to. I withdraw as counsel, effective immediately." He gathered his briefcase and walked out of the hearing room, leaving Pelosi utterly and completely alone. "That courtesy," Patel said calmly as the doors swung shut behind the lawyer, "is now over." He pulled out his phone and made a brief call. "Marshal Stevens, your agents can proceed," as if on cue. The main doors to the committee room opened, and 4 stone-faced U.S. Marshals entered, their purpose clear and unmistakable. "No," Pelosi shrieked, a primal scream of disbelief. "You can't. I have congressional immunity." "Immunity does not cover criminal acts, Madam Speaker," Patel said, his voice cold as a tombstone. "You are under arrest." As the marshals approached her, her carefully constructed world shattered into a million pieces. She lunged for her purse, her hands shaking uncontrollably, fumbling for the flask that was visible inside, a desperate reach for her last remaining comfort. The lead marshal gently but firmly took her arm. "Nancy Patricia D'Alessandro Pelosi," he stated in a formal monotone, "you are under arrest for violations of federal law. You have the right to remain silent." The click of the handcuffs snapping onto her wrists echoed through the silent room, a sound that would be heard across the nation. It was the sound of an era ending, of a dynasty falling, of justice long delayed, finally arriving. As she was led away, a slumped, defeated figure, she screamed, "This is Trump's fault. This is a political witch hunt. This is justice," Kash Patel said quietly to himself, watching her go. He then addressed the stunned committee. The Pelosi crime family was not operating alone. "We have 147 more sealed indictments. The swamp is deep. But the FBI's pumps are now running 24 hours a day." He gathered his documents, his work here done. As he left the chamber, a young girl in the gallery, holding one of his children's books, called out, "Mr. Patel, is the witch really going to jail?" He knelt down to her level, a small, genuine smile touching his lips for the first time that day. "Yes," he said softly, "she is." Just like in the story, when good people decide to be brave and stand up for the truth, the villain always loses. Never forget that. He walked out into the hallway, leaving behind a city in shock and a nation forever changed. The fairy tale writer had come to Washington, and he had slain the dragon. The story was over, but the history had just begun. Now is the time for every patriot to stand up. If you believe that no one is above the law, smash that like button, subscribe to this channel for more exclusive revelations, and share this video with everyone you know. The fight for the soul of America is here.